A new report commissioned by the Navy itself has concluded that sweeping manpower, training, and readiness standards adopted by the service over the past decade to cut costs have backfired. The report, commissioned by the U.S. Fleet Forces Command and written by retired Vice Admiral Phil Balisle, who once headed the command that oversees construction and maintenance of Navy ships, concludes that the drive to reduce manning on ships has left the surface fleet unable to fight. Problems include degraded operational performance of its Aegis radar system, the Navy's crown jewel, poor training and leaders who accept poor performance, and degraded life expectancy for ships because of subpar maintenance. Phil Ewing of Navy Times, our sister publication, broke this story. Phil, it's great to have you back on the show.
Good to be back.
So what are the top conclusions of the Balisle report, and what's the Navy's response to it?
Basically, what it found is that the Navy's decisions about manning, training, and maintenance over the past 10 years are just not working. The choices they made to put fewer sailors on ships, to train them in a different way, mostly with computers rather than with hands-on instruction, and treat maintenance differently in the surface force just hasn't worked. The ships are having more problems, more accidents at sea, and sailors are reporting to their ships for the first time less prepared than their predecessors were to do their jobs well.
What are some of the kinds of problems that we're seeing out in the fleet?
They're failing inspections more often. The general condition of the ships in terms of simple things like rust and parts broken and equipment not functioning is getting worse. And so it's become a real problem for the surface force.
And what's the Navy prepared to do about it? What's the response to the report?
What they've said is this basically confirms things that they've learned or realized internally already. And so they've already begun making some changes internally, and I expect there are probably more in the works. They're going to add more sailors to ships. They're going to change the way they do training a little bit, and generally try to regain some of the previous ways of doing business that they had discarded in the early 2000s.
The Navy bet really big on the idea of lean, saying that it would save money to build more ships and then to also have actually a bigger Navy by having fewer people on each of its ships. Now those ships are not going to last as long. Is lean manning finished for good?
I don't think it's finished, but I think the fleet is going to try to get to the same goal by going in different directions. They'll add some sailors back, they'll change the way crews work a little bit, but the basic philosophies about having fewer people at sea probably remain in place just because of how expensive it is to maintain people in an all-volunteer force.
Are they looking at anything to basically substantively and more structurally change the way ships are manned?
I think so, yes. I think they're going to change training to give sailors a little bit more of a good baseline when they report to their ships for the first time, and also look at specific divisions where they've had problems with smaller crews and add more human beings simply to do those jobs.
The Aegis radar system has always been important to the Navy to protect the fleet at sea from missile and air threats, but now that's also going to be the backbone of the sort of U.S. global missile defense system. What sort of impact are the problems we're seeing with Aegis, which is a very complicated and sophisticated piece of equipment, having on that broader missile defense agenda?
Well, that's a great question, and the Navy really isn't saying. They haven't had a very compelling response to this report or some of our stories about how this will affect what's called a phased adaptive approach. President Obama's plan to use Aegis and Navy ships to give ballistic missile defense protection to Europe starting next year. And so commanders have said before they think they can do it, they think they're ready to go, but there's still a lot of uncertainties about how well that's going to work.
Let's talk a little bit about merchant ships. Merchant ships operate with very, very lean crews. The Merchant Marine actually operates the U.S. Sea Lift Command ships. Why is the regular Navy having such problems with it? Aren't there more creative ways to man their engineering spaces, for example, to get the maintenance done, but also use fewer people?
There are some pilot programs in the works in the Navy today. In fact, the USS Kearsarge, which is an amphibious assault ship in Norfolk, is doing something like that right now. But the difference between Navy warships and civilian ships is bigger than you might think, because civilian ships don't have to go to general quarters and fight the ship, respond to threats, and can operate at a steady state, whereas Navy ships have to be able to fight and be able to respond to accidents.
And especially, from a damage control perspective, those extra hands make a very, very big difference.
Correct.
How far before we know the results of what's happening on Kearsarge?
The ship is undergoing a pilot program now in which basically its engineering sailors are treated like civil service mariners, the guys you mentioned who work on MSC ships. And they're going to do a deployment in September, and when they come back, the Navy will know a lot more about what you can do with an MSC-style arrangement on a Navy warship engineering space.
In the 30 or 20 seconds we've got left, do folks in the Navy think that they have a broader cultural problem here?
I'd say they definitely do. It's gotten to the point where the fleet, where sailors coming into the fleet see their chiefs and their officers accepting rust and degraded equipment, etc. And if they see the supervisors doing that, they assume that's okay. And so one of the things the Navy needs to address is how do you get everyone on board to take a stake in the ship and its future.
Phil, thanks very much. We really appreciate it. Great series of stories. Coming up next in my notebook, some other